When you think about the kinds of asymmetric threats that major Western naval powers face in places like the Gulf or off the coast of Libya or in a number of other places around the world, you think of things like fast attack craft, like conventional submarines, like anti-ship cruise missiles. But one of the most significant threats they face is the very humble, very simple mine, whether that be a World War II relic that hasn't yet been discovered, or any one of a number of modern, very easy to deploy but very effective mines that a number of nations around the world have in their inventories and often talk about using. Today, a large number of the major powers around the world are very concerned with energy security and having access to major energy resources that they then transport by sea along sea lines of communication and through major choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, like the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, like the Suez Canal, like the Malacca Strait. These areas are very, very small, narrow, confined water spaces. And if a malintent power of some description and in some circumstances was inclined to do so, it would not take much to deploy a mine or even just to say that you had deployed a mine and create doubt, consternation and even serious concern in the mind of a potential power who might not wish to risk sending a naval ship or even commercial ships through those waters as a result. So it's actually a very, very effective way of closing off a strait of water just by deploying or even just by saying there may be a mine threat in that particular part of the world. When you talk about the potential risk of an asymmetric capability like a mine, one of the key things to bear in mind is for a very small investment in a very simple capability, you can have a very, very significant impact. Recent history, for example, in the Gulf War, in the tanker wars of the 1980s, has shown that there have been some very real examples of major vessels, whether they be naval ships or commercial vessels, running into mines and doing some quite serious damage. So a very simple mine deployed in the right place can give you a very, very significant impact, either in terms of closing a volume of water to access for a naval ship or commercial ship, or should ships still be using that access route, that actually disabling a ship itself and causing significant damage for particularly in terms of the value of that damage compared to the value of procuring the mine in the first place. When one thinks about the kinds of circumstances in today's world in which a mine threat might be real, much of the focus tends to look at an example like the Strait of Hormuz because of Iranian rhetoric about and capability to actually close the strait if it felt so inclined, and therefore have a significant impact upon the world's economy by halting or stopping the flow of traffic through the Straits of Hormuz, and particularly the energy resources coming from the Gulf itself. So there's much discussion of whether Iran might do this, why, and what the Western response and other nations' response to that threat might actually be. But again, this is theoretical because the argument goes that the Western naval presence in the Gulf deters Iran from doing that. So here we don't have an actual example yet as where mines have been used to close the straits other than the tanker wars of the 1980s. However, more recently there are actual examples where mines have been used by asymmetric powers to try to create a risk or a threat to Western and other navies in their waters. And the two cases that come to mind are the 2003 Gulf War, when certain parts of the northern end of the Gulf were mined and needed to be cleared by Western forces before Western forces could go ashore in Qasar and support the land operation ashore. And also more recently off the coast of Libya, when British and Belgian and Dutch and other mine countermeasures forces were required to go in and clear mines that had been recently laid by forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi. So this is not actually just a theoretical discussion. There are actually practical examples of this happening around the world today. When you think about the way in which naval power is used around the world, of course the US Navy is the archetypal example of naval power, being the largest navy by a considerable distance compared to many other navies around the world. There is a view, therefore, that what do these other navies add to the US? If the US has everything, does it need support from allies in naval terms? Well, yes, it does. And the MCM example is a very good one of a specific niche capability that allies have that the Americans admit openly they depend on. Nations like The French, nations like the Dutch and the Belgians, and in particular the UK, have a very good state-of-the-art MCM capabilities that the US relies on, in particular in places like the Straits of Hormuz, in the Gulf region, where the UK, for example, has 4 MCM vessels permanently deployed there and provides a capability that the US uses on a daily basis to ensure that, that it and other coalition forces and commercial assets can use the Strait safely and securely. What you see today generally is a mine threat scenario where there'll be a minefield deployed below the surface, and glass reinforced plastic hulled vessels will deploy to that threat area and use mine sweeping and other capabilities to be able to dispose of the threat or neutralize the threat or negate it in some way. The risk there, though, is one of putting the ship and the man into the minefield, and that is a position that many navies are trying to move away from in the current and future environments. As we develop, as nations and navies develop more unmanned capabilities, the emphasis really is now on to what extent can those unmanned systems be used to take the ship back away from the direct area of the mine threat and use that off-board sensor and effector capability to be able to deal with the mine threat at range rather than having to put the ship in harm's way itself. While many navies are facing problems financially in terms of developing future programs, some of them are actually using the fact that they're required to stretch out current hull classes to good effect in terms of MCM program developments by using these existing hull classes as a test bed for future capabilities. So, for example, in the UK, the Hunt class mine countermeasures vessels are being used as a test bed for these future off-board systems. In this context, assuming that the endpoint for the transformation to off-board sensors will be quite a way down the line, using current established MCM platforms as a test bed concept helps to de-risk a lot of the steps in that process and provides an interim capability until technology is sufficiently well developed that the future as to what can be done in terms of MCM from an off-board point of view is much clearer.